everyone. Today I am joined by my good friend, Mike Murgatroyd, who has served as a mentor, guide, and inspiration on my own sustainable ambition journey. And Mike is one of my favorite people to talk to about creating a fulfilling and meaningful life and how one's vocation fits into doing that. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a great honor to be with you this afternoon.
Oh, thank you. I'm so grateful you agreed to be on to share your own journey and wisdom with us. I think people are going to get a lot out of this conversation. And before we jump in, let me first properly introduce you. So Mike Murgatroyd is currently the co-founder and president of Van Evolve, which brings the very best in adventure vans and adventure van components to the US, so you are ready for adventure anytime and anywhere. So if you are one of those people who got through the pandemic, the bug to get out on the road, you got to look for Mike and Van Evolve. And prior to starting his entrepreneurial ventures, Mike spent his career in CPG with companies such as P&G, Clorox, and White Wave Foods. He was also a brand management consultant specializing in innovation for companies such as Beyond Meat, Earthbound Farm, and Good Belly. Mike and I had the pleasure of working together at Clorox, and both hail from our undergraduate alma mater, the University of Virginia. And Mike is also a husband and proud father of two fabulous boys. So with that, I'd love to have you start, Mike, by just so we start at the beginning of your career and just have a little bit of context. I wanted you to share where you grew up, what you majored in at UVA, and what your first job was and how you selected that at the time.
Sure thing. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in Reston, Virginia, which was just the second planned community in the country. So we could call that a Stepfordville type town. But even though that might sound like it would make for a cookie cutter upbringing, it was anything but. It was real fertile ground to grow up and explore and try things. And from there, I went to first to Northwestern and then to University of Virginia. And I studied undergraduate business. So there I studied finance, international business, and a minor in economics. So it was all business all the time. And really what precipitated that path for me, it sounds really trite and silly when I say it now, but I was interested in Wall Street. I'd watched that 80s movie Wall Street, which isn't full of moral positivity, but for some reason it captured my imagination. So in high school, I wrote papers about Michael Milliken, the junk bond king. I engaged in garage sale arbitrage prior to that, and I knew I wanted to be in finance, or at least I thought I did at the time. So out of school, I went for one of the Wall Street jobs, and I went to Bear Stearns as a junior investment banker. So that was the start of, I guess, how it all began.
Yeah, wow. I just want to go back. Wait, so what is garage sale arbitrage?
That means you go around to the neighbors early and you smile your nice smile because you're a young, charming kid, and you buy things on the cheap. And then you turn around and you set up your table and you sell those same items at a higher price. So you might say, where are the ethics in that? As a youngster, maybe you're not thinking about that. But I guess the point is I've always been fascinated with arbitrage, buying low, selling high, going to one place where there's a competitive advantage in terms of acquisition, and then going to another place where there's a competitive advantage in terms of selling. So that's something that's always caught my imagination, whether was selling candy at school or garage sale arbitrage.
Yeah, I love that. I just didn't know if it was a term for something else or if it was what it sounded like, Mike. But what that brings up for me, even in your response to that, and we'll probably come back to both of these themes. So I just want to call it out here that to me was a signal of your early entrepreneurial spirit kind of coming through. But it's very interesting that you also just noted in that, like, well, what are the ethics in that? And so the fact that you bring that up is not surprising, knowing you so well. it's not surprising to me. So I'm sure that will continue to come up as part of the conversation. And I'm curious then, so you then went to business school after Bear Stearns, and what prompted that next step in your journey?
Sure thing. So after Bear Stearns, I actually went and I was a corporate development manager for a Fortune 500 company. I did that for just a year. And meanwhile, Silicon Valley was just going off on the opposite coast because I was in New York City. And I decided that, as a young man, that's where you should go. It was a gold rush. And how many gold rushes happen in a person's lifetime? And I'd also gone cross country twice in vans, by the way, just with my buddies during the summer. And I'd laid eyes on San Francisco. And to me, that was the promised land. I said to myself then that I would get back there. So I took two backpacks because I've always traveled with backpacks. And I flew out there. I knew one person who lived west of the Mississippi. And I just began again and just got excited and into the swing of what was going on, all the energy that was going on over there. So I did that until we had the bubble burst in 1999. And at that point, I traveled around the world again with those same backpacks. And I got a little stuck. I had always had in my mind that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and for whatever reason, I didn't burst down the door. The moment sure didn't present itself to me, and so I thought I needed a bit of a fresh start. And for me, that was a business school. It was kind of a plan B. It was kind of a stage to kind of launch a rebirth. And so, as all those markets crumbled, instead of thriving, I found that I needed something to hold on to and, again, a way to relaunch. So that was business school, the decision to go to business school.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I used business school in a similar way in that it was pre the bust or the boom and bust. I kind of came out during the boom, but I used it as a reset in some respects, and also to kind of say, oh, okay, well, what do I really want to do next? If that wasn't the first path that I took out of undergrad wasn't, quite where I wanted to land in the end, what might be next, and how do I use business school to kind of put me on a different trajectory? And so how did you, coming out of business school then, how did you end up, where did you land first coming out of business school? And how did you take that shift then from finance to marketing, say, and I think marketing was your next path, but how did you make that decision? And you said, entrepreneurship didn't present itself, so you didn't go that way. What kind of took you towards the next step that you took coming out of business school?
Sure. And, entrepreneurship, I don't know if it's its job to present itself to you. I honestly think that you need to hustle and kick the door down. And I think my story is the story of buying down my risk in the world, which is also has tension with being an entrepreneur, right? Because you got to throw caution to the wind a lot of times if you want to be an entrepreneur. But at that point in my life, I felt like I had to bring that risk down a little bit. But that's not exactly answering your question. So I did go into consumer packaged goods, and so in business school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to go back into finance. And why was that? At the heart of it, maybe it's always been a tractor beam to be the scrappy type entrepreneur that I am. And, I found that I was able to have a lot of these cool professional challenges in life that did present themselves to me. So like I said, I believe you have to kick down the door to entrepreneurship. But what presented themselves to me felt like they were really attractive professional jobs in industries. But the tension in it is that I would always get bored no matter how exciting that job might be to others, or, even potentially prestigious to some. I would always get bored with those jobs in, call it, 2 to 4 years. Always, always. So I knew I didn't want to go back into finance. Why was that? Is it because I was always going to feel that way with any kind of professional job? Possibly. Was it because working 80 hours a week and seeing what that lifestyle brought, it really made me think twice? Definitely partly that as well. For me, lifestyle design is very important. So a 360-degree look at what do I need to do to be happy? What is the balance of it all? Balance being the thing that really seems to be important to make me tick. So I said, I felt like an unbalanced life to me. I want to try something different. And there was a guy who was a year below me in banking, and he was working at Procter and Gamble. And I just happened to call him up, or he was in an event, something like that. We talked, and he told me about brand management. And he said, you're an entrepreneur in a way, working within a company, running different businesses in different categories and launching products and having to have the full skill set, the full bag to be able to run a business. And in my kind of risk managing yet entrepreneurial mind, I said, well, hey, that sounds interesting. I got to give that a try. So that year I got the Procter and Gamble internship. And, these were the lean years in the big downturn after the dot-com bubble. And then after that, I decided that I still had always San Francisco and California in my mind. So the opportunity to go to Clorox was one that was an easy one for me to want to take. It was this new brand management track that I was excited to take, and it combines the Bay Area. So it felt perfect. And that's kind of where we crossed paths, Kathy.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I love hearing the path and the story. And I do want to come back to, we're going to probably come back to a couple of themes that you brought up in your responses. And I do want to go ahead and go back to this idea of risk that you were bringing up, because it's really interesting, Mike, to hear you describe your path and the fact that you knew you wanted to do something entrepreneurial. You were doing things entrepreneurial even as a child, but something was kind of getting in the way. And like you're saying, what you've learned now is you got to kind of kick down the door. And what's been interesting on the podcast, when I've asked people, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self, or people that are in their 20s right now and managing their careers? And it's fairly consistent that people will say, take more risk. And yet I also think that I'm learning that we may need to learn how to take risks all along the way, and not just think that we can only do it when we're young. I recently interviewed Dory Clark, who has a new book out called The Long Game, and she borrows from the concept of Google and this idea of 20% time. And I liken that to, oh, wow, if we can take 20% of our time, if you will, and plant seeds and play with things all along the way, there's no reason why we can't be taking small risks, if you will, throughout our career. But bringing it back to you, Mike, I know you shared with me, there's this idea about taking good risk. And you also talked earlier about you felt the need earlier on in your career to buy down risk. So can you just talk to me a little bit more? I know that was a long preamble, but talk to us a little bit more about risk and how it kind of maybe your perspective on it got in the way, or how your shift, like what your experiences now have maybe led you to how you think about risk now.
Sure. And as you describe it there, it almost sounds neurotic, but hey, we're all humans. And I'm talking about it in terms of in my mind, because it probably is a lot like a pinball game, right? And I guess there's a couple of things that get in the way for me, and I can only talk to those, although I'm sure lots of us share some of these things in common. One is I'm very analytical. I think about things a lot. And I can be guilty of overthinking things. And when you overthink things, you probably overly consider risk. Whereas somebody who's more live in the moment, I've been accused of being type A about being type B. doesn't think too hard and might just be willing to cavalierly jump into that risk. And I think that is a trait that serves a lot of entrepreneurs well. I do think you can still be an analytical entrepreneur as well, but you might be like me, where you have conflicts in your own mind, and you need to learn how to deal with that and digest it. The other thing that was interesting is, as I was growing up, I was by myself a lot. I had a great middle class existence with a lot of friends and a great school and all that. But I still felt like it was all on my shoulders in terms of no safety net. And maybe I'm sure in terms of the spectrum of safety nets, I was solidly in the middle, if not more than that. But I had it in my mind that there was no backstop. And I thought about that from a young age. I did our grocery shopping as soon as I had my driver's license, and doing the laundry and the cooking, and my parents were gone a lot, weeks at a time sometimes. And so I had that in the back of my mind, and that was kind of the buy down risk. It was, hey, I need to ensure I can make my way in the world, and again, those are huge tension points with being an entrepreneur. So that was interesting. Yeah. And that just was my process, and who I am and how it came to be, which probably put myself in a lot of situations where I was doing jobs where I was learning a lot and being around great people, but it probably ultimately wasn't where I should be. So I like to look at those as building blocks towards getting more and more entrepreneurial. But, back to what advice would you give? Yeah. I think the capacity to take risk is much greater when you're younger, but yes, you need to keep on maintaining it and cultivating it. It's a practice. And yeah, I would be really interested to see what my 20-year-old self would have been like had I been taking some of the, even what some might think are minor risks now, back then in my life. So yeah, I guess I'll go with that cliche, which is, but I will add to it based on your lead. Understand what good risk is and embrace good risk. All risk is not created equally. And risk is a fantastic part of the portfolio that allows you to live an extraordinary life, whatever that means to you. And if you don't embrace that good risk to you, again, it's subjective, you could still lead that extraordinary life, but it's going to be arguably much more difficult to do so. You need to kick that door down at least a little bit, if not a lot.
So can you say a little bit more about what is good risk?
I think good risk is, again, this is my analytical self, right? I think, okay, I purposefully with life, man needs something to do, something to love, and something to hope for. And those things should all be tied together. If they are, you're going to enjoy what you're doing on a meta level. And if you enjoy what you're doing, you're going to be doing your best. You're going to be able to grow the most, create the most, add the most to society. And so if a risk aligns with what those buckets are for you, right? If it ties to something you love and what you hope to do with your life and how you like to spend your time, it's probably a pretty good indicator, clue that taking a risk in that realm lined up with those goals and objectives is a good thing to do. Again, I can't help being analytical, but that's just how I do it.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what I think is really interesting, when I've talked with other entrepreneurs, it is so often that they actually will say that they are risk averse. Many entrepreneurs that I've either listened to, been talking to myself, or listened to on podcasts or other venues where I get to hear them speak, they often say, I don't like risk. So I don't think you're alone in that, Mike. And I wonder, have you as you've moved more towards entrepreneurship, are there things you do for yourself? Perhaps it's aligning and making sure it's clear that this is a good risk for you. But there, from a business perspective, or stepping into that entrepreneurial role, are there things that you've learned work for you to help manage that risk taking and breaking down the door, as you have said?
So this might go back to that earlier advice for the 20-something self. Okay, so you just cued it off to me in a little bit more concrete way. A, get smart. Okay, do your homework. Look at the data. Do all the different jobs. Wear all the hats. Then learn to trust your gut. The learning to trust your gut is my interface with risk. And once I know that I've analytically, logically, rationally built my skill set to the best of my ability, nothing's 100%, but, to a great level for me, then I'm going to trust my gut now. Maybe that's something as you're younger, either you over trust your gut or you under trust your gut. Maybe some get it just right. And so that's the relationship with risk. Okay. So you get to know the industry, the skill sets, and then trust that you are capable, that you're passionate in this area, that you're studied. And if you follow that gut and trust, I think you can do great things.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, in this sense of really do the analytics and get smart, do the work so that you can trust your instincts and your gut and what it's saying to you, is what I'm kind of taking away.
Yes. Yeah. And that doesn't have to be, oh, I need to go to school for 2, 4, 6, 8 years. It doesn't have to be that at all. Lots of ways to skin that cat and lots of time durations as well.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you don't have the time to do that. And then you still need to have the conviction to trust your gut and not get tied up. As long as you feel like you have a gut. If you don't, maybe that's a signal to you in that particular moment or that issue or that realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, then I wanted to also come back to something you were talking about, Mike, and I might come at this with a few different questions along the way in this part of the conversation. But you mentioned lifestyle design and how important that is. And I know you are quite intentional around this. And I want to start here actually thinking about it from a career perspective first, where at some point you had created a 10-year plan and you were going to retire early. And that was kind of and it might also have been associated with risk and de-risking, if you might speak to that. But what prompted you to create that plan?
I think that was fear. I think it was fear. I'd gotten in the thick of these professional jobs, which, some people, which work great for some people. And, some people would be glad to have. And I was really glad to have those opportunities. But again, the tension always gnawed at me that it wasn't quite right. The process, the procedure, the rigor to make a decision. Again, I'm all about doing the right homework and the right analysis, but I wanted to move more fluidly. I would tend to get really passionate about things, and if that didn't always play well in a corporate environment. So, back to that topic, I was dissatisfied. And so I thought I would use my analytical rigor to come up with a plan and execute it, in order to remove myself from that situation, rather than just taking some risk on and maybe going back to what some of my animal instincts and who I really was at my core were, which was to be a scrappy entrepreneur. And so I undertook this idea, the de-risked version, to maybe do what I thought to be free, which I thought was what I wanted. But when you're in the thick of a professional career, sometimes it's hard to see through and understand what you really want to grasp at. It's easier to say what you don't want to do than what you want to do. And so my reaction was to come up with the plan and follow it. The interesting thing in doing that is you really start to blunt your ability to take on risk because you follow a plan for so long. And when you do that, you stop maybe seeing all the opportunities that are around you because you're no longer taking those opportunities. You're staying single-minded and focused. And that is at odds with taking risk, and which is at odds with seeing the opportunities that occur in life. And so much of that is life, is what makes it. The random chance meeting or opportunity, and where that leads you. After all, they say we only use, what is it, like 14 to 18% of our brains, whatever it is. And isn't it funny that when we are trying to go after something, do something, it feels like a lot of the time life presents those opportunities all around us. Well, maybe they're all around us all the time, and this isn't revolutionary thinking, and you just see them when you're ready, when your aperture is open.
Mm. Mm.
So that plan was interesting, and it was a great learning, but I actually had to undig out of that and learn to take even a little bit more risk again afterwards.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly, so, we work together at Clorox, so I know what that was like for you. And working in a corporate environment, it wasn't fully satisfying for you. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're like, hey, let me just make the money I need to make so I can be done with this environment and then go and do something else. And I'm curious, even before I go a little bit further, like, what did you think you were going to do after that 10-year plan?
Every time I think that I can reach a plateau and cruise, I get slapped in the face with how dumb that is for me. Part of it took me a while to figure out that part of who I am and was just somebody who needed constant growth. You and I talk about this, Kathy, that we're not satisfied with the day if it's not chock full, or we can point to something clear that helped us grow or that we learned. And, I guess I'm an addict in that way. And I think that's a healthy addiction for me. It's what I need. And so that plan, I don't know if it had a pot of call it spiritual gold at the end of the rainbow. It was more about just getting out. It was just like, it was so busy and so all encompassing to be in some of those jobs that I don't know if I had a clear idea of what I wanted to do next. I just knew I didn't want to do that. And I just knew that I wanted to make sure, going back to this, not having a backstop safety net, that I didn't need to worry too much about that part of the equation. So, again, trying to de-risk it, and where risk and healthy risk and the growth where that comes from is probably what I needed to feast on.
Mm. And so as you look back on it now and you're on the other side of that, what counsel might you have given yourself back at that time? Would it have been like, pay attention to the different opportunities that are presenting themselves, or just release yourself from this plan, or be willing to take a little bit more risk here, Mike? How do you think about it now on the other side?
Maybe if I had just taken a break and gotten some distance from everything and thought about it, that would have helped. So I think taking pauses in life that are true pauses, because there can always be a lot bearing down on us that allows even a pause to not be a true pause, whether that be professional or medical or something in the family, or I remember that I didn't go study abroad because of somebody that a romantic interest. There's always a distraction, right? And so true pause, that could have been it. The courage to kind of leave what maybe lots of folks thought was a fantastic place to be, and try something different. That idea that there's so much pressure when you go through this business school route, for some, and for me, to craft a resume that doesn't have gaps, that has the right jobs and the right stops and everything. And that's, it can lead to a fulfilling life for some, but for me, that was a real clenched up way to be. And you're trying to adhere to a script that was made for many, but not for me. was difficult because then I wasn't paying heed to the true opportunities and maybe where I could really spread my wings. And so really it was probably maybe doing what more was expected of me within the pathways that I chose, rather than maybe having enough courage to, again, take that risk or take the space to see what risks I should have taken. So, it was interesting. It's a story of triangulation. And if you're a loyal person, not just a loyal person, I guess I don't like to give up easily, which is a great trait of an entrepreneur. But it could also mean that sometimes in some of these earlier phases, I didn't move on fast enough. Even in some of the later phases, don't move on fast enough.
Yeah, so interesting. And I think one of so many things that I hear from others too, in terms of when some of us want to step off a traditional path, it really does take a lot of courage. You're going against that social norm and you're writing your own script. And what I hear you describing as well is really getting comfortable with honoring who you are and truly stepping into that in so many different ways. So I really appreciate that. And I think it's true how powerful pauses can be. And I think when we don't give ourselves the space and the openness to pause and reflect, it's often hard to see where there are opportunities or what that next step might be or what's truly calling for you from your heart. So I appreciate you really sharing that and reflecting on it. I did also, Mike, want to come back from there to this whole idea of lifestyle design. So you mentioned, I asked about the 10-year plan, and then you also talked earlier about the balance of it all. And I know you have a family, you are an entrepreneur, which is demanding. But when you think about this life design and kind of structuring a more holistic life, like it's not all about your work for you. So how do you think about that? And I know you're philosophical and intentional about that. Hopefully that's coming through for others in this conversation. So when you think about lifestyle design, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's just striving to really understand what makes me tick, not only just for the sheer fact of making me happy, but I think that's the best way to be productive and to contribute, not just to me and my family and my friends, but to the greater society. And so, I told you I was an investment banker in the beginning. So I spent a lot of time on Excel, right? 80 hours a week sometimes. And so I don't think in zeros and ones, but I think in Excel spreadsheets. And so everything seems to be, it can be linear, although again, that's at odds sometimes with entrepreneurship. But so I just think, okay, well, let me really think about what makes me tick. And there's a lot that goes into that, and there's more than career that goes into that, but it's all tied together. And I mentioned that framework of a man needs something to love, do, and hope for. So you need something to do with your body and your mind. And what are those? It just shouldn't be anything. It needs to be tied to what you love to do. So you love people and you love activities, and so if I really got to the heart of who I was and what activities and people I loved and why I loved those things, then it falls to logic what kinds of activities I should spend my time doing. Okay. I hope we all need to have those larger goals, or it's good for many people too, because again, that's that guiding star. And when you have something you're going for, it helps me see the opportunities that do crop up in life. We talked about that pause, that clarity, what have you. So when I think in this fashion and I have those things I'm hoping for in the short term and the long term, then it helps me be aware of when an opportunity is presenting itself and for me to jump on that. And I can be intentional, as you say. So all those three buckets, they tie together really well. And they tie to my interests and what I love and what I hope to accomplish. And that enables me to really purposely focus on lifestyle design And again, that encompasses goals and people and activities. And I don't really, I don't necessarily separate the career from the activities. I view life to be a series of projects. And I think we should be jumping into projects all the time. And whether those are professional or personal, work is a project. They're a series of projects. And whether I'm working for myself or someone else, I'm getting paid, I'm not getting paid. Aren't these all work? So this idea of career for me is just how I spend my time. I want to be doing projects that I enjoy. I want to be growing in them. And I really just want to geek out doing these projects with people who like to geek out doing them as well. And then I think things are really fulfilling, really productive, and really helpful for everybody.
I just love so much of what you shared, Mike. And I think that if you'll allow me, like some of what I'm hearing are some of the things that I think I just believe are so important for people to really think about as they're shaping their lives and careers. And you started by sharing how, in my own language, I would say you really need to get to know yourself and really understand those things that you do love and those things that you say that you want to, be and do. And they're, and then it's like you can be intentional about how you're going to structure your time and your life and those projects, as you're saying, that you're going to take on. And many people on the podcast have talked about this idea of it helps you, and this is where the intentionality comes in. It helps you know, what are you going to say yes to and what are you going to say no to? And when people do struggle with those boundary settings, and I know I struggle with it when you're ambitious, a lot of things come up that you want to do. There are a lot of projects you might want to do, but is that a project you really want to say yes to or no to? And do they align to these different aspects of your life that really fill you up and that you really love? And so I appreciate how you're talking about that in this context of helping people be intentional, because I do think, for better or worse, you can either jump into life and let the current take you, or you can have some discipline and some intentionality to it. So you're shaping it in the way that you really want it to be shaped.
Yeah, I think that's dead on, and I agree with you. And I think it all goes back, just to put a bow on it. What were those things where you really lost track of time? What were those activities? What were those behaviors, even as a kid, starting from when you were a kid? And oftentimes those are the strongest clues. And if that leads all the way to intentionality, and then hopefully at the end of all of it, to a life well lived with the people that you want to spend the time with, then that's the goal. That's the goal. It is to spend our time and not pass it.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that. Spend our time, not pass it. That's so wonderful. Well, before we wrap up, Mike, I want to just ask you this one question, and it's coming at it a slightly different way, but sustainable ambition for me is both about, well, how do we stretch ourselves? And we've talked a lot about how you stretch yourself. And then there's, how do you also sustain yourself? And again, you are an entrepreneur. Not being an entrepreneur is demanding. You also are a very active father of two young boys. You're a wonderful husband. Like, how do you get all that into your life and do so in a way that sustains yourself?
For me, I need all those things. That's the balance of it all, like we've talked about. That's what gives me energy. So the family gives me the energy to keep on working on all the projects. The projects give me the energy to then go and really appreciate the family, and the balance all works together and feeds together. I need to keep growing, and without those really rich areas of inspiration and subject matter, I'd have to reinvent it. Not to say that it couldn't, but that balance is what works really well for me and feeds upon one another. Leaves you at your best and your freshest as you go from one to another. And it's not just, they're not discrete, they work together.
Yeah, I love that. And I think maybe people would be better served if they actually saw that they really are symbiotic and that they work together and don't have to be divergent in terms of helping to shape a true fulfilling whole life. So that's so great, Mike. I knew I would love talking with you, and I have. We're almost out of time. So a final question is just, would you have a final piece of advice you leave our listeners with?
I just say, have the courage to go out there and create an extraordinary life for yourself and those that you love, whatever that is to you. Because extraordinary is different to everybody else. It's not this idea of elite or what have you. It is what's really honoring you, what is enabling you to grow, what is enabling you to be your best for you, for your friends, your family, and for the world as a whole.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike, for being here. If people want to find you or keep in touch, so we just send them to Van Evolve. Is that where we should have them search for you?
That sounds great. So vanevolve.com would be great. And I've really enjoyed speaking with you and being with you in this context here today.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Mike. I always, as I said, love being in conversation with you, and I appreciate you sharing your journey with everyone listening.
Thank you.
Find more inspiring interviews and get show notes for this episode at sustainableambition.com/podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode or my insider tips, guides, and tools by signing up for Sustainable Ambition Forum, my twice monthly newsletter. Sign up at sustainableambition.com/subscribe. Thanks again for joining me. Speak with you next time.